So today we're going to examine the origins, impact, and spread of the agricultural and industrial revolutions. So we have to ask the question, where did the industrial revolution start and why? So objective one, we're going to contrast the important factors that contributed to the beginnings of the industrial revolution in England, including a supportive government, inventive people, access to raw materials, and investment wealth. So where did it begin and why? You need to narrow in on a little place called England in the 17 and 1800s, right? A little island off the coast of Europe. That's where the Industrial Revolution starts. We can trace it back to England in the 18th century. Why England? Well, we're about to go over these. There's several different reasons, but these are 5 we're going to go over. They have an innovative textile industry, coal near the surface, new inventions and innovations, government protection for those innovations, and money from its empire to invest. And you got to ask yourself, you have to wonder what would Europeans and British people say about why the Industrial Revolution started there in their own area, in Europe, in England. What would those people who were there say? They did say things like it was because the Europeans were just superior to other people, right? That was one of the reasons given. They just possessed a superior intellect and things like that, right? That was a justification they used at the time. We don't support that idea now, but that was something they said at the time. So England, a big factor. There's coal right near the surface, right? Lots of fuel. You use coal to create heat, and that'll be important more later. Earlier in the 18th century, they're mostly using coal to warm a house, right? Warm your food. So there's lots of coal, and they're digging it out of the earth. What happens when you dig down deeper into the earth to get more and more coal? And if you know anything about English weather or weather in the British Isles, it tends to rain a lot. So what happens when you dig a hole and it starts to rain? Well, it starts to fill up with water. So you got to find a way to pump that water out, right? Just buckets and things like that take way too long and aren't extremely effective. The first steam engine was created to pump water out of these coal mines, right? You put water, you heat it up with coal in here, it creates pressure that moves this piston up and down. The pressure builds, it moves up, then the pressure releases, and it goes back down. Pressure builds up again, up and down, up and down. So and that creates motion, which turns the wheel and runs the pump. So the first steam engine, was created by a guy named Thomas Newcomen. Nobody really remembers him, but James Watt improves it, and his version becomes really popular and widely used. We don't remember Newcomen very much, but James Watt, this is where you get the word watts, like electricity. Like you're pumping in 1,000 watts, and that comes from his name. So if you created something like this, you might get a patent on it. We'll talk about that in 1 minute. But we get steam power, ends up doing things like the steam locomotive. And this is a giant cooling tower. That's not smoke coming out of the top. That's water vapor. That's steam. This is a cooling tower in a nuclear power plant. This nuclear power plant is in Mississippi. It's called the Grand Gulf Nuclear Power Plant. And it's just a big old steam engine. Right? Instead of using coal to power it, it uses radioactive materials which heat up the water and cause steam, which causes pressure and makes things move, makes turbines move, and produces electricity. Quite a bit of electricity, in fact. So what is a patent? If you make one of these new inventions like the steam engine, A patent is something that protects you, protects your legal right to that creation. So if somebody tries to steal it or copy it, you can sue them, right? And here we have two British lawyers, or barristers as they call them, and they still wear those funny little wigs, and they probably look kind of a lot like they would have looked in the 1700s. So England, unlike a lot of countries, had pretty strong rights over, pretty strong protections of your creations, unlike a lot of countries. So that was an advantage also. Another big advantage they had was the British Empire. There's Britain again. They had all this territory in the Americas. They get a lot of things like lumber out of the Americas, right? They had lost these colonies. That's what became the United States. Precious metals from South Africa, cotton from India, and other resources from all over, right? So they have a lot of wealth, a lot of resources coming in. They're not here yet. This will be how large they get, and a lot of it has to do with the advantages they get from the Industrial Revolution, helps them create such a large empire. So those are some reasons why it started. Where did it go to next is the question. Logically, right, starts in England and then spreads right next door, right? England to France and Germany and these countries, and then across Europe it spreads, makes its way east. Now, some countries embrace it more than others, right? Then where does it spread to next? You might take a guess. One of its trading partners, they also speak English. That's right, it goes to the United States pretty quickly, right? In the U.S., steal or copy a lot of those innovations because British patents can't help you in America, right? The British can't go sue in America, and they could try, but they're not going to get very far because it's two different countries with two different legal systems. And you can see here, railroads are kind of an indication of industrialization at this time period in the 1800s, right? And by 1870, extensive railroads built, especially in the northern part of the United States. By 1890, just 20 years later, even more and more railroads being constructed all across the United States. And one interesting thing I like to talk about is how these railroads, how this Industrial Revolution literally changed the way we view time. This is where the railroads are the reason we have time zones here in the United States and the rest of the world. They had to basically, they had to keep the trains on time, right? So they devised a system of 4 different time zones in the continental United States so that you could know if you leave New York at 4 o'clock, you know what time it's going to be in St. Louis when you get there. And they standardized time. Where used to, before they made these time zones, everybody basically had their own time. It might be 10:30 in St. Louis, and it might be 10:40 in Chicago. They just based it on the local time. Then later, after railroads, they standardize it. So Chicago and St. Louis had the same exact time. Then where Asian country did it go to next? That'd be Japan. Japan had been in something called the Tokugawa shogunate, and that was still a system where there was a shogun in power, like a military leader, and with samurai also still playing a powerful role. But and there was an emperor, but he had no power. So after lots of imperial conquest going on in East Asia and Southeast Asia, and then the United States sending a military envoy to Japan, Japan had this reaction where they restored the emperor to power. They changed their government, they changed their culture, and did lots of different things. This is called the Meiji Restoration. And a big part of that was bringing all this industry, this industrialization into Japan. So they're one of the first countries in East Asia to fully embrace industrialization.